On my main channel today, I made a video about socialists and what they want, particularly the democratic socialists, and we're going to talk about, I think this might be like my fourth video on this channel of why socialism doesn't work. And I'll start with, this article basically says, my family escaped socialism, now my fellow Democrats think we should move the party in its direction. And then also, look at this big red bar, alarming increase in STD rates, Jesus. We're not going to talk about that, but USA Today really wants to make sure that's what I'm looking at. No, I want to talk about socialism, not STDs, USA Today. But I appreciate the alert. I'll be careful. But here's the thing: capitalism is about the individual. And look, there's a lot of debates about what these things mean. But at its core, capitalism means you, as a private individual, control what you do. You work, you keep it, you trade it, and then we have regulated capitalism where certain things are not allowed, and that's what we have. That's what we live in. Socialism is an extreme end, where it's very extreme from where we're at, right? Social control of the means of production. That means you don't get to keep what you make. You go work in a factory, you leave, you get nothing. It just means that you're allowed to go to the store. Like, there's a lot of problems with it because people have different needs. And I'm gonna bring up an example of Soylent. If you're not familiar, Soylent was meant to be a food replacement. The idea was they would formulate something that was so perfect you wouldn't need to eat anything else. And they learned that doesn't work. Why? Because not everyone is the same height. Not everyone is the same width. People have different needs in their bodies for how much nutrients. You can't just say somebody absolutely needs 200 milligrams of vitamin C, because the amount of nutrients and vitamins you need is dependent on your weight. So what they'll actually say is like something, like X milligrams per pound. And that's how you try and determine how much you need of particular vitamins. So it becomes problematic then when Soylent tries to introduce a one-solution meal. Now, to an extent, it kind of works, because you can replace many of your meals with Soylent, but you still need to have a variety of other foods in your diet. I haven't tracked Soylent in a long time, but around the time I was working at Vice, they were doing a documentary on it. And what I was told by I'm not sure if it was one of the dudes from Soylent or one of the journalists from Vice, I can't remember. But they said basically you can have I think 5 days out of the week nothing but Soylent, but you have to have at least 2 days of regular food. Something to that effect. It might have been at least one big meal, because your body needs varying degrees. And to me, this is a really good example of why planned economies don't work. You can tell someone you're allowed to have, 5 gallons of water per day. Right? The average person, I believe it's true, needs a gallon of water per day for everything. And so if you're trying to allot water from the public works, right? You pay a water bill when you own a home. People who rent typically don't. You got to pay for that utility because it's being provided to you. So what if they said, okay, everybody gets 5 gallons per day, except in one house, you've got a dude who's 6'7", and he actually needs a little bit more water. Well, it's not really fair, is it? The argument is to each according to each according to their need. From each according to their means to each according to their need. Sure. So then how does that function? Are we gonna tell someone, because you are of this size, you get these things? The problem with a planned economy means that you're not gonna have vegans. I mean, like vegan products are difficult to process. Fake meats, processed proteins, they're typically more expensive. So let's imagine you're in a society that wants to be equitable like the democratic socialists want, but they want to regulate the economy so that you can't have profit. That means they have to plan out what you can get from the supermarket. What do they do, a point system? Because now you're just getting back into capitalism. If they allocate points, this is what someone told me at Occupy Wall Street. They said, what if you got a certificate and they allocated points and you could use those points? And I'm like, that's just money. That's literally what money is. And yes, you could trade your point certificate to somebody else. They could turn it all digital so that you can't. But then the problem becomes, what if you are training to be an athlete and you need more protein? Well, right now, you can simply go to the person who purveys in fine proteins and buy what you want as an individual because you know what you need. But when the system is a planned economy, you have to advocate to the state or collective why you need more. And you'll say, listen, I'm an athlete, okay? I need more protein than that person. And then bureaucracy gets in the way and you don't get your protein. This is why individual trade tends to work better. So let's take a look at this story before I prattle on about socialism much longer. Much longer. That was grammatically incorrect. My family escaped socialism. Now my fellow Democrats think we should move the party in its direction. Democratic socialism is a lot like the system my family fled, except its proponents promise to be nicer when seizing your business. Cuba's socialist revolution was supposed to work for workers. Like my grandparents who lived in Miami during Fulgencio Batista's dictatorship, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, in January 1959, just 2 weeks after Fidel Castro seized power, they returned to the island to care for my grandmother's ailing mother. For the next 20 years, they remained prisoners in their own country. As Cuba's political and economic situation worsened, my grandfather told a friend he wanted to return to the US. Someone overheard the conversation and reported him to the authorities. For this, the Castro regime threw him in jail. He was later stripped of his job and salary as an accountant and assigned to feed zoo animals. In addition to the emotional distress it caused, this made my family's financial circumstances even more precarious. To understand my grandparents' desperation to flee socialism, imagine leaving everything behind and starting anew at almost 60 years old. And I want to tell you another story. I have a friend in Ukraine, and I was at their flat, and they told me that, I don't know if this is a story about someone they knew or what, but I was told there was a story of people in this building. It's an old Soviet housing block, where the neighbors got into a fight with each other over some nonsense. Everybody was starving, basically, but they didn't like each other. So one of the neighbors, so you have neighbor A and B, right? Let's say neighbor A contacted the authorities and said that neighbor B was bad-mouthing the Communist Party. And a day later, neighbor B was gone. And now neighbor A had nothing to worry about and the dispute had ended because they used the authorities to get rid of them because dissent is not allowed. Think about how Antifa operates. And yes, of course, they like to claim that they're fighting fascism and all that, but they literally show up to events and don't let people speak or think. They say, you're fascist, you're not allowed. Even if you're not fascist, you can have literal libertarian, like right-leaning libertarians who want small government, borderline anarchists being told they're fascists. These people will smear anybody with a label and then dictate what they can or can't do. But and look at how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez operates. She bans the press from public meeting. Well, you can't have democracy if people are uninformed. And that's a scary thought. These are people who hide behind these labels, but ultimately will end up enacting some kind of authoritarian system, but they claim it's more equal. Morality should not be dictated by a small group of individuals. And then all you'll end up with in the socialist system, if you're not homogenized, if you don't adhere to the greater culture, they'll force you to feed zoo animals and take you out of your job, causing emotional trauma. They'll tell you that you don't deserve the extra protein to be an athlete. And then you'll wither and you won't be able to survive. The individual needs to determine what they need. It just doesn't work at a larger scale when you have these big socialist societies. So this person says that they were born in Miami a little after my family was able to return to America, when Jimmy Carter allowed travel restrictions to lapse. Growing up, a framed photo of my parents with President Ronald Reagan was a mainstay in the living room of our modest duplex. Yet during the first election I was able to vote, I served as a precinct captain for Democratic presidential candidate John Kerry. 4 years later, I knocked on doors in New Hampshire for then-Senator Barack Obama. In 2016, my wife and I drove 14 hours to volunteer for Hillary Clinton, and this June we marched in support of immigrant families. Despite my working-class immigrant roots, I am concerned by the popularity of socialism within my party. On the night of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory in New York, I thought her use of the term was a misnomer. Then I began studying the views of the Democratic Socialists of America, the rapidly growing national organization she belongs to, and was disturbed by what I learned. Like those of yesteryear, today's socialists believe the government should nationalize major industries, propose eliminating private ownership of companies, and reject profits. In other words, democratic socialism is a lot like the system my family fled, except its proponents promise to be nicer when seizing your business. That's about it. There's a really funny meme I saw, and it said, socialism versus democratic socialism. And in one photo, it's a bunch of people under a boot trying, to carry it. And the next one, it's a democratic socialism. And it was the same photo, but a disco ball and rainbows everywhere. Like, you're still suffering, everything still sucks, but it's democratic, so it's okay. People like to claim that fascists are trying to infiltrate the government and take over society, and that they use memes and jokes to do it. They claim that the alt-right uses online culture and gaming and, to essentially recruit people for neo-Nazism and fascism. Sure, argue that, and argue the exact same thing towards democratic socialism. People who claim they aren't racist, but are bigoted to a great degree, and I'm using bigoted on purpose. They claim that they don't want communism or authoritarian dictatorships. They want true equality. They want all these really nice things. And then they want to institute a system that would take away your right to own things, your right to profit off the fruits of your own labor. If you decide to carve a stick into the shape of a little man. That is labor. You can then say, hey, look, I did something. And someone might say, wow, that's a really cool little figurine, a nice little effigy. I would like that from you. Oh, hold on. You don't get to control what you do with it under socialism, right? I'm giving you an extreme example because I think for the most part, what democratic socialists are actually advocating is that major industries would come under the control of the government, not like, if you want to make a little wooden man, sure, do whatever you want with it. But ultimately, when the greater assets of our nation are controlled by the government, you're essentially saying, right now, we've got a handful of multinational, unaccountable corporations. That's bad. They're corrupt. How about we give all of the power to one organization, the government? I don't see a very big difference between the two. Suffice it to say that the government has all the guns, and corporations will usually just abide by what the government wants them to do. But you can't just say this power monopoly is bad, so let's make an even smaller power monopoly. That doesn't make sense. What we want to do is break everything down. We want to break down the monopolies and we create more diversity within the marketplace. Giving the government the monopoly on violence and our economy sounds terrifying. So when I confronted some progressive friends about this, they initially dismissed my concerns. After sharing some articles with them, the conversation shifted to they just want us to be more like the Nordic countries, and they're not like real socialists. Both are reductionist self-delusions to avoid confronting difficult truths. The latter is a particularly absurd fallacy because it requires one to believe that adults who willfully join socialist organizations, sound like socialists, and call themselves socialists are not what they claim to be. And I've had a ton of people tell me, Ocasio-Cortez isn't advocating for the end of capitalism. She's just like Bernie Sanders. And I said, why are you assuming what she wants? She is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. She signed their membership application and agreed to their constitution, which states they want to abolish private property and have popular control of resources. That's what Ocasio-Cortez signed up for. Why would you assume she doesn't want that? She's literally a member of this organization. Simply because she hasn't openly said that doesn't mean she does or does not believe it. But there is evidence to suggest she does believe it in that she signed up for an organization that makes you agree to those terms. And that's all we have. That bit of evidence is pretty strong. If you're going to ask me if Cortez is an anti-capitalist and wants to abolish capitalism and is a socialist, I'm going to be like, well, she joined an organization that says they want to do that. She was endorsed by them. Would they endorse a capitalist? Probably not. But maybe she's lying. I don't know. All I can say is she doesn't really openly talk about that kind of, socialism a whole lot, but she is a member of that group that does. Claims of Nordic socialism are also largely exaggerated. As Jostein Skar of Oslo Economics told me, I would stress the Norwegian economic system is capitalistic, heavily influenced by the US and UK. This is probably why the Democratic Socialist argues the Nordic model is not good enough. And that is true. The actual Democratic Socialist organizing people, not the members, don't think Scandinavia is actually socialist and it goes far enough. They want full-on socialism. Is it really so hard to understand? So I'm just going to go to the final conclusion. They say, in response to the calls for the end of capitalism, this must never happen. The descendants of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels should have no place in the party of Harry Truman and John F. Kennedy. Given its horrific record of human suffering, it would be a moral disgrace for Democrats to embrace socialism just to win elections, as some suggest. Those who use the blitheful ignorance of many for the political gain of a few deserve to lose. Indeed, if socialism represents the future of the Democratic Party, that's a dystopia no American should want to be a part of. And I had someone criticize me saying that if I'm supposed to be unbiased and nonpartisan, why am I arguing against socialism? And before I end, I'll just say this. It's because most Americans on the left, the center, and the right are capitalists who believe in the individual's right to control the fruits of their labor. It is a small group of extremists who are commandeering the Democratic Party and tricking people into thinking socialism is what they want when all they really want is a welfare program. And that's dramatically different. So anyway, I will continue to talk about socialism, but stick around. I believe I have one more video coming up in just a few minutes.